lacked courage to go inside. Joanna came near the door. "And now?" "The same thing," he replied. He stepped down, called her, and together they went towards the terrace. Near the mango tree, directly under the pigeon house, they stopped, and the Indian, as if in fear of being heard by the child, asked softly, "Joanna, don't you know any prayers for this?" And he pointed to the deserted pigeon roost. "Only Lina knows," she answered. "She can pronounce the proper spells?" "So they say." Tiburcio stood as if in a dream. Suddenly, in a firm voice, he announced, "I am going to her." "Now?" "Certainly. Haven't you just said that she was a sorceress?" "I have never seen it, Tiburcio. That's what people say." "But you?" "I? No. And I am afraid that it is too late. You have seen yourself how far gone he is. He is no longer interested in anything. I move about, I speak, I go here and there, I come back again into the room. But it is all nothing to him. Ah, God in heaven!" Her voice died out. Suddenly she melted into tears. Tiburcio withdrew and commenced to pace slowly up and down the terrace. The white moon was rising. The fields became less obscure, and, in the light, the shadows of the trees, very black, stretched across the ground. "Patience, dear woman, patience." The strident crickets were chirping. The caboclo murmured, "Yes, I know." Of a sudden Joanna shuddered. Quivering, she turned towards the cabin, from whose wide door shone a ray of livid light. For a moment her astonished gaze lingered, and then, with a bound, she was gone. Tiburcio, motionless, without understanding what his wife had just done, quietly awaited her return, when a piercing cry rang out. The caboclo rushed to the cabin and made for the room where the candle was burning. The woman, on her knees before the little bed, leaning over the child, was sobbing desperately. "What has happened, Joanna?" She gave a hoarse cry and threw her arms across the corpse of her son. "Look! It's all over!" She bent down. Her face brushed the cheek that was burning. Her trembling hands felt a little body that was still aflame. She touched the sunken chest, where the ribs showed through like laths, and the hollow abdomen. "Listen to his heart, Tiburcio." He could only reply, "It is all over." The mother arose with a leap, disfigured, her hair dishevelled, her eyes sparkling. She tried to speak, stretch her hands out to her husband, but fell limp upon a basket, and, bowed down, bathed in tears, she began to repeat the name of her son with an infinite tenderness that was rent by sobs. "My Luis, my little Luis, but a moment ago living, O blessed Virgin!" Tiburcio turned away and, in the room, before the table, he stopped, his eyes wandering, his lips trembling, the tears rolling in big drops down his bony face. Joanna left the chamber, wavering as if drunk, and, seeing him, threw herself into his arms. He held her without uttering a word, and they stood thus in embrace for a long time, in the dark, narrow room where the crickets were chirping. Joanna went back to the chamber. Tiburcio remained leaning against the table, his eyes fixed upon the candle which flickered in the breeze. Slowly the light of the moon came in, white, climbing upon the walls. He arose with a sigh, went to the door, sat down upon the threshold, lighted his pipe, and looked leisurely out upon the country, which was growing brighter beneath the moon. Suddenly it seemed to him that he heard the cooing of pigeons. Above, the stars were shining, the tree-tops glittered in the moonlight. Could it be an illusion? Motionless, he concentrated his attention. The cooing continued. He arose impetuously, walked straight to the pigeon roost, and leaned against the trunk of the mango tree. Could it be the pigeons who were returning, after the passing of death? He began to mutter in fury, replying to his thoughts. Now it's too late, a curse upon them!" A beating of wings, a tender cooing, and little cries came from the pigeon-house. There was no doubt now. He went forward and, from the middle of the terrace, watched the pigeon-house, walking resolutely towards the cabin. Joanna was sobbing hopelessly. He took the candle, went to the kitchen, and seeing the axe in a corner, he seized it, still muttering. He then turned back to the terrace and, having reached the mango-tree, rolled up the sleeves of his coarse shirt so that he might swing the axe. At the first blow against the post which supported the pigeon-house, the birds grew still. Tiburcio redoubled his efforts. A crack now weakened the structure, but still it resisted. He leaned the axe against the trunk, and grasping the branches, raised himself to the top of the tree. From there he supported himself between two boughs and gave the large box a furious kick. The pigeon-roost fell shattered to the ground. Two pigeons flew off in great fright, dazed. Uncertain of their direction in the clearness of the night, they lit upon the roof of the hut. The caboclo slid down lightly along the trunk, and saw two little bodies who were whining, staggering, dragging themselves along. They were two little pigeons. He bent over them, took them in his hands, and began to examine them. They were ugly, still without wings, having only a thin down to cover the muscles of their soft, wrinkled bodies. The Indian turned them over, this way and that, in his shriveled hands. He felt their fragile bones, and the little things struggled to fly away, moving the stumps of their wings. They stretched out their necks and whined. Gnashing his teeth, Tiburcio squeezed the fledglings and crushed them. Their tender bones cracked like bits of wood. The blood gushed forth and trickled, warm, through the tightened fingers of the man. Under the impulse of his fury, he threw them to the ground. They flattened out, soft as rotten fruit. And the caboclo, growling to himself, trampled upon them. The parent birds were cooing dolorously upon the thatched roof, flying hither and thither. Joanna, embracing her dead child, was still sobbing when Tiburcio entered the chamber. He stopped before the little bed and looked down. Of a sudden the woman shook, arose with a start, seized her husband's arm, her eyes distended and her mouth wide open, her head bending over as if to hear voices, far-away sounds. "What is it, Joanna? What is the matter with you?" In terror she stammered reply. "The pigeons, dear husband. Don't you hear them?" It was their sad cooing that came from the roof of the house. "They are returning. Who knows? He is yet warm!" she cried. And in the heart of the woman arose a great hope. Tiburcio shrugged his shoulders. "Now it's their turn to mourn," he answered. "They are sobbing, like us. It's a pair that remain behind because of the little ones. I dashed the pigeon-house to earth. I have killed the fledglings, see?" And he showed his bloody hands. "They flew away. They're on the house. Do you want to see?" He went out. She followed. They walked to the terrace. Tiburcio pointed to the ruined pigeon-house. Then he grasped the crushed bodies of the little birds. "Look!" Without breathing a word, Joanna looked on. In her horror, she had stopped weeping. She gazed upon her husband, whose burning eyes flashed fire. He threw the first little pigeon upon the roof, bellowing, "'Tis well!" He threw the second. "'Tis well!" he repeated. The pigeons, frightened, flew off in the dark foliage. "'Tis well!" he said once more. Joanna, dumb, terrified, could not remove her eyes from her husband, who was now crying with sobs, his opened hands stained with blood. "Come, dear husband. It was the will of God. Our little son is in heaven." And slowly she heartened him. They entered their cabin, and, before the pallet of the dead child, the tears gushed from their eyes, while, on the roof above, the pigeons, who had returned, were cooing dolorously. End of Section 5.